Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 50 of Podcast vs. Enemies, a Destiny Massive Breakdowns show. My name is Impetus, and I am joined by my co-hosts, Court and Saint Kabr. 50 episodes, lads. Can you believe it? Just over a year of the show in the books to boot. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we don't have much time to reminisce since the information train is full speed ahead over at Bungie, so we are positively drowning in news and interviews and, oh, by the way, tweets. So let's get on with things. Saint, I believe we have some folks to thank for these 50 wonderful episodes, don't we?
We do indeed. First up, I want to give some shout-outs to some new patrons, Glenalth and Zugashi. Really hope I pronounced your names correctly. Thanks for joining the ranks of the patrons that help keep the show going. Also, as always, want to give a shout-out to our sponsors, Asking Monk, Black Hammer Tech, Binary Wolf, Rice-A-Roni, Deacon, Moonlight, The Shazzle, This Moment, and Zen SoCal. I also want to give a quick shout-out to at Maximus Polygot, a.k.a. Alexandre Morales, who he asked us to do an episode where we clean out each other's vaults before Lightfall, but Imp just pointed out that would probably be the end of this show, and I'm gonna tend to agree that I don't think we could make it back from something as brutal as that. So we're probably gonna hold off on cleaning each other's vaults for now, but maybe someday we'll do a little inventory management after Lightfall gets out there. But for this week, we've got plenty else to talk about other than just cleaning out our vaults to get ready for all the new loot coming. Court, what are we covering in our 50th episode?
What an exciting week we've had. We've got some highlights from the most recent TWAB from the 9th of February. And it's going to be all about Strand. It's all about ability sandbox changes heading into Lightfall and post-Lightfall. We've got a lot of news and articles all about those. Some developer interview highlights as well. We are recording this episode the day before Joe Blackburn's State of the Game 2023. I think it's 5,300 words, which will be talking about Lightfall and the year ahead. Just to put that in perspective, the previous State of the Game articles were 2,139 for State of Destiny 2, which came out 2 months after D2's launch. We also had Luke Smith's Director Cuts, parts 1 through 3. That was 1 month before Shadowkeep. That was 4,000 words each. And we had the 2021 update, which was the Road to Witch Queen. And 2 weeks, that was 2 weeks after Season of the Chosen, which was Season 13, which was 3,640 words. So we've got a sizable State of the Game coming up. We will be following up with any highlights on next week's episode. Plus, I assume even more, a rainfall of absolute cyclone of information as we've had the last couple of weeks, which, of course, we'll talk about. But last week was all about Strand. And speaking of last week, what were we all up to? Well, I'll kick us off. I think we've all been doing it the last week. That is duality farming. So done a little bit of Galran to get the grenade launcher. I know Saint's going to talk about a little bit of that in a second. But mainly I've been doing master clears for Keitel. Get all that lovely juiced Artifice armor, which we had. I don't think we're doubting it, but I know the comms team at Bungie did come out and double confirm that the Artifice armor that we have right now, and if you're still chasing over the last few weeks of this season on Master Spire, you will have that retroactively work for next season with the Lightfall changes to the armor system. And that's pretty much it. I've not really done anything else other than just little bits here and there, a little bit of Gambit, a little bit of Crucible, but yeah, lots of duality farming. Impetus, what have you been up to?
Yes, sir. Just been doing duality with you, with our audio engineer, Autodidaktos, as well. A few other patrons in the Massive Breakdowns community, getting those runs in. Getting the two bell down, that felt nice. Didn't think I personally got a 1 bell, but I know you and a few other folks were able to land that. Getting those Keitel clears all stocked up on all 3 characters. I think I'm good to go. Probably will want to see how the Strand fragments play out with stat modifications. Might need to go back in next season. But yeah, I think I've got most of the pieces that I'll need, especially now that our armor elements are disappearing. So the total number of armor pieces that you'll need for a given character, will probably be less unless you need to utilize a bunch of different stuff between PvP and PvE, which is not my case. So did a bunch of that, did some Gambit as well. I'm still trying to track down that second reset before the season ends, just so I can cash in those seasonal challenges. I did a solo flawless Vox Obscura last night. I knew there wasn't a triumph for it, but I figured I might as well have that on my dungeon report. It turns out Vox Obscura is not on my dungeon report, so there's no way to know if I ever actually did a solo flawless. You just have to take my word for it, but I did it. It was fine. So that's what I did this past week. Saint, how about yourself?
Yep, been stacking up that Artifice armor. Got a lot of stuff in the vault for my Titan at this point. Trying to get a few more pieces for my Warlock. I think the only one bells that I've gotten were when I was using Melee Wellmaker on my Hammer's Titan and like a 3 stacks of Fontamite, right? So I could get get a quick melee kill off on one of the Bellkeepers, get your Fontamite up, and then immediately stun her pretty much and go in for the one phase. But yeah, it can be tricky. Honestly, to get everything lined up just perfectly. And even then, it's if you get flinched off by something and you just miss a crit, there goes 130,000 damage out the window in one shot. But all that to say, it's pretty good farms, pretty lucrative. And yeah, farming for that perfect lingering dread still eludes me. I got a nice ambitious assassin shield clip, but no auto-loading holster roll just yet. Leveled up the fixed odds a little bit after finally getting the last one, and also still looking for a better malicious birthright. It's got lead from golden sideways in the third column and frenzy and auto-loading holster in the final column. So honestly, it's just some kind of combo there, but don't love farming the corrupted GM, even when it's, 18 minutes or something like that, 17 minutes, which is, it's pretty good for a corrupted run, but yeah, that's a slog, especially compared to the master dungeon farming and all that. So let's jump into this news, man. Let's start off with this TWAB. Just absolutely swinging in a TWAB, and then just kept going all week. What are we kicking it off with here?
Yeah, so let's talk about kind of the surprise. I think this dropped actually in a tweet, but was backed up in the TWAB. Crafting materials, particularly the resonant elements, the core crafting material that caps out at 10,000, they're going away entirely with Lightfall's launch, which is a huge surprise. Of course, when the crafting system first came out, we had those 4 different types of elements plus the raid element. The raid element stuck around, but the other 4 remaining types were compiled into resonant elements, and now resonant elements themselves are disappearing. So standard currencies such as glimmer, enhancement cores, etc. will replace the resonant element cost when you are crafting a weapon. Deep Sight Attunement is also being removed with Lightfall's launch, and so we are not quite sure what crafting is going to look like. This is just, again, kind of the base information that they gave us here. We were told that resonant and harmonic alloys will still be used at Lightfall launch. That's for resonant alloys are for the standard weapon shaping, and then harmonic alloys are for raid weapon shaping. But we were told that these will be overhauled sometime in 2023, and then they did clarify that ascendant alloys are going to remain for now. So the crafting system is definitely being streamlined, which I think is a nice change. But yeah, if you don't have a lot of enhancement cores, if you're someone who's still struggling to get a decent stockpile for solid glimmer sources, this might be even more of a drain on your play time. So we'll see how expensive this ends up being with these standard currencies, which are already used for a lot of other areas in the game. Big thing that was in the TWAB was the Destiny content vault. Just a reminder for the content that is leaving us in terms of destinations. We are losing the Wings of the Helm, the specific season ones. So that's the Sciorium, which is next to Crow for Season 16, the Crown of Sorrow, it's Season 17, and then the Rasputin Exoframe, which is Season 19. The Warmind Launch Facility, the Derelict Leviathan, and the Last City Elixir Quarter are all going away. We are also losing the Vendor's Spider, Crown of Sorrow, Star Chart, and the Exoframe. Seasonal bounties and quests will also be removed. We are saying goodbye to seasonal materials, Umbral Energy, map fragments, etc. All of the destination materials are also being shelved. The core destination materials, that is. We are having stuff like Dark Fragments and Here Always pieces. Those will remain. You can convert those to Glimmer. Yeah, Glimmer over at... oh, goodness. What's the guy that we turn our engrams into in the tower? I'm forgetting his... Rahul. Master Rahul. So those will be... those items will still have uses. Seasonal narratives from Season 16 to 19 are all disappearing. We are losing the Vox Obscura mission. The Dead Messenger Exotic, which is the reward for that, will probably be in the kiosk, moved over to the kiosk, the Exotic kiosk. We are losing the Nightmare Containments and the Sever missions, Catch Crash, Expeditions, and Hideouts. And the one that really stung, of course, the Operation missions, and especially Seraph's Shield. That will be disappearing. We are not sure what is going to happen to Revision 0, which is the exotic reward for Shield. Maybe it will be in the exotic kiosk, or perhaps in a quest via the crafting relic, but we don't have details for that at this time. Just a quick reminder of the content that is staying with us. We still have the Throne World destination, plus those vendors and the Lost Sectors. The expansion content from the Witch Queen, which is, of course, the campaign and its legendary mode, the Wellspring, Altars of Reflection, the Preservation mission, the Vow of the Disciple raid, the Parasite quest, that's all sticking around. We are also keeping Psyops and Heist Battlegrounds. Those are now going to be added into the Strike playlist. Those Psyops were our Season 16 activity, and of course Heist Battlegrounds are this current season, Season 19's activity. So those are going to stick around and be added into the Strike playlist. Duality and Spire of the Watcher, our 2 dungeons for this year, are also sticking around. You still will need to purchase the Witch Queen dungeon key to access those if you don't have it already. And King's Fall, the raid that came back from D1 this year, that remains free to play for everyone. That is also staying around. So that is the content that is staying from this year. Now, let's jump into Strand, our main topic for this episode. Saint, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so we are going to start off here with a lot of details that came from the Inside Strand article. I'll hit on some kind of themes that they are working from, and then I'll define our keywords for our abilities and things like that. And then we will get into how each class uses these in their various like subclasses and abilities and things like that. So yeah, let's first kick it off with kind of like their vision for Strand and where Strand came from and all that stuff. With Strand, Guardians will be wielding the fabric of the universe in ways that will be a formidable threat to anyone that stands in their way. From the neon-drenched streets of Neptune's secret city of Neomuna, Guardians soaring through the sky by grappling onto an enemy spaceship, it's been clear from the start that Lightfall is different. Yes, things are coming to the head in the penultimate chapter of the Light and Darkness saga and story, but Lightfall's influences and inspirations prove that there's plenty of room for the team to let loose and to revel in their creativity and craft and to have some fun. One of the touchstones the team drew from was the bombast and flair of 1980s action cinema. We had conversations about where Strand, or the concept known as weaves, came from, trying to reinforce the physical language for how it manifests in looks to make it feel like it was from the same darkness family as Strand, or as Stasis, I should say. The more the team talked, the more the concepts evoked a language that describes Strand with terms and descriptors like weaving, tangling, universal strings of consciousness came to be. Everyone was building on top of everyone's ideas, Eric Smith said. How we choose to implement these things affects how we talk about them and vice versa, like weaving objects instead of spawning objects or summoning objects. It all becomes part of the aesthetic. Another thing they really focused on here is their actions per minute, or APM, basically how often you can use abilities and do different things like that with your subclass. And this is going to directly impact all of the Strand verbs and keywords here. So we're going to be using these verbs and keywords a lot. I'm going to hit on some definitions. Weaving is the act of using Strand to create an object. You have unravel. Defeating an enemy affected by Strand will unravel them. Tangles After unraveling, they are disconnected from their life force, and this creates a swirling bundle of strand fibers, a tangle. When shot, they cause an AoE damage to nearby enemies. Tangles can be picked up and thrown for deadly effect. You can also grapple onto these tangles and fly with it. Very much so on the Warmind Cell kind of a theme, if you're very familiar with a lot of the Warmind Cell mods and builds and things like that, kind of drawing from some of their experience there and building it directly into the subclass. Next up, we have Suspend. Enemy is lifted off the ground for a brief duration and immobilized. In PvP, players can still slowly move about and fire their weapon from the hip. Sever. Reduce damage output if this status effect is applied to an enemy. Threadlings are explosive minions woven from strand matter that can run forward, jump, and then explode, causing damage to enemies. And then finally, we have Woven Mail. A Guardian is sheathed in a protective mesh of strand matter, reducing incoming damage. Woven Mail only reduces damage taken to the body. Head and melee damage will not be reduced. I think that's probably going to be much more applicable in the Crucible than it will in PvP. PvE. Last verb we have here is Grapple. Grapple is the grenade ability, or takes the place of your grenade ability. With this ability, players can press the grenade button and their Guardian will weave a hook from strand matter which they can grab onto an anchor point. The grappling hook will then begin to contract, pulling the Guardian along Strand's grapple, and can create its own grapple points out of the air. So you can always propel yourself through the sky even if there is not a solid surface which you can latch onto. Guardians will also be able to execute melee strikes during or at the end of grapple, known as a grapple melee, which deals bonus damage, unravels enemies, and pushes them backwards. Some quotes here talking about the idea of grapple. When we were developing the concept around ropes and string, we felt it was like the perfect opportunity to add grapple into the game. You never want to shoehorn something in for the sake of interaction that isn't very natural. It has to be the right time, the right situation. The stars align to have something like that here. When we got things like Tangles online, we started to realize that the gameplay here is incredibly novel, interesting, and new when you have to do all these quick context switches between grappling and slamming and throwing a tangle. All these things can happen in a very quick succession that rewards the player for having their high APM, actions per minute, which is not really a thing that we have in the game and many classes before. As a case here, I defeat an enemy with my melee ability. They unwind into a tangle. I grapple onto the tangle, which refunds my grapple, and I snatch the tangle out of midair. I then hurl the tangle at a group of enemies in the distance, grappling onto the tangle again while it flies and pulls me through the air behind it. As the tangle nears a group of enemies, I slam downward out of my grapple to suspend a lone enemy who split off from the group, while the tangle slams into the rest of them and explodes. There's really a lot of cool dynamic interactions built into Strand that make it feel very unique. They did mention just a couple other grenades. A Threadling grenade splits into 3 projectiles that weave Threadlings whenever they impact. And then a Shackle grenade. A detonation suspends nearby enemies and sends out a secondary blast to suspend nearby enemies again after it hits its initial land. So lots of new stuff here. Unraveling, tangling, suspending, severing, creating Threadlings, using our grapple to fly around, woven mail for body armor. It's a lot. So let's take some time to jump into our respective subclasses and talk about kind of our individual abilities and aspects and fragments that have been revealed. Court, take it away.
Yes, for the Hunters, we have the Thread Runner. Now, a lot of these subclasses are going to dive into their respective kind of keyword. We've seen this before. I think Stasis is the really one to highlight, which are the most relevant when it comes to subclasses own a particular verb. At least with Hunters, it's slow. With Titans, it's crystals and shattering, and with warlocks it's freezing, and it's very much the same idea here with Strand. Hunters are all about grappling, as you'll see with the aspects and the supers and some various synergies that I'll go through. But they talked here that while every Strand Guardian class will have access to the grapple and the array of mobility options it brings. The hunter takes movement and speed to an entirely new level, from attacking multiple enemies at once while in midair to using a new rope dart weapon that benefits from maximum agility. It's no wonder that playing the Thread Runner has been compared to the thrill of watching a superhero come to life. So very much the Spider-Man kind of vibe is very much I get from a Thread Runner. Just a very important highlight here is a reminder that the grapple takes your grenade ability. So you have the option to not use grapple, but you may be kind of, detrimenting yourself with the hunter subclass because that's its whole kind of identity here. So for its melee, it's one out of the Titans and Warlocks have a melee that goes up to 3 melee charges, which is something we've not seen. I have seen in some concept art and some UI art that there is definitely the opportunity for melees to go up to 3 charges, but hunters only have 1 melee charge, and it's more of a kind of focused one. So it is the rope dart, and that is that it bounces between enemies, damaging and severing them before returning to the hunter. So reminder, sever is reducing damage output. That's your kind of affliction on enemies. Upon its return, it does grant melee energy for each enemy hit. So in essence, while the Titans and the Warlocks have their 3 melee charges, depending on how much melee energy does get returned, you could, have some high upkeep with that. And they have implemented a kind of unique interaction here that if you catch the rope dart by pressing the melee input at the right time, you'll get additional melee energy, and perfecting that timing will give you that really great melee energy, so you can keep, that action per minute vibe that we're going here.
It's very finessed, very hunter-like. Right?
Yes, yeah, very much is something I would expect to see with Hunter, and just kind of throwing a bunch of stuff at enemies. They revealed 2 aspects for each of the subclasses. For hunters, it is the ensnaring slam. So while you're in the air, press the air move input to slam downward, suspending all nearby enemies. So there's another verb that's coming in here. Again, lifting. The enemy is lifted off the ground for a brief duration and are immobilized. So think of Shatter Dive here, a bit more of a kind of omni effect here. You don't need an additional, say, crystals to make some synergy here, but you do have the suspending all nearby enemies, which looks really fun. We have the Widow's Silk, which grants an additional grenade charge. So again, you don't necessarily need the grapple here. You could have this with the Threadling or the Shackle grenades, but its whole kind of gimmick here is it's building into grapple. So Hunter's grapple ability creates a persistent grapple tangle when it latches, which fully refunds grenade energy when grappled to. Use this ability to set up chains of grapple points that your entire team can use, greatly enhancing their ability to quickly move around in combat and or traverse the environment. That's a very interesting one. I think one of the articles that we'll highlight later on, they mentioned it as like almost like a one of those outdoors gym jungles kind of. You set up the place, the environment. You as the hunter and your Titans and Warlocks and other hunters can use them at their disposal as well. So very interesting. This is also, at least in Destiny 2, this is the only time where hunters have had an additional grenade charge outside of exotics like Shinobu's, which is very interesting to see on hunters. Its super is Silk Strike. Again, it's all about grappling. So you'll use your grapple to freely move through the world in third person, while also throwing your rope dart to strike down enemies. You will be able to use your grapple more often during the super, and the rope dart features both light and heavy attacks. With the light attack, for single opponents that can be used in air and on the ground. And when you are on the ground, you can chain attack seamlessly. Hitting an enemy with the tip of the dart deals bonus damage, and defeating an enemy with it causes the enemy to explode. And then you've got the heavy attack, which is the 360-degree arc, damages all nearby enemies, and you can also use this in air or on the ground. So again, it's another kind of really playing into the grapple grenade ability here. For some kind of synergies to look forward to, or to look out for the launch of Lightfall as you're playing through the campaign, and then obviously post-campaign. We'll each talk about our kind of things to look forward to. For me, obviously we have the Certarachnes Facade Hunter Strand exotic, which will give you that woven mail after grappling. So at least at this Strand's launch, this will be the only place where hunters can get woven mail. We don't know about future aspects or current and future fragments that are coming, but this is one that I spotted, that hunters can't naturally get woven mail, but you can use the facade to build into that. We know of Quicksilver Storm's new catalyst effect, where grenade launcher kills spawns a tangle. So as Saint was talking about there, you can pick those tangles up and throw them, and us hunters can, building into the whole grapple aspect, can link into them and fly away with them. This is probably the most the part of the Strand subclass for hunters that I'm looking forward to the most. Just being able to pick up a tango and throw it, and then grapple onto it and just fly around everywhere. So for me, I'm thinking more of the kind of hit and run play style. So you jump in, spawn that tangle, and once you're done, throw that tangle away, hook up to it, and you're off. And just hit and run. Really good play style there for all kinds of content. For other synergies that are not kind of specifically for Strand, I've looked at Assassin's Cowl. I know they haven't explicitly mentioned it. They did mention Fel Winter's Helm and a few other exotics that we'll talk about shortly. But Assassin's Cowl plus the melee will give you that health and void and vis trigger, which would be really good depending on how potent that melee is, and being able to use it a lot as well. Frosties is obviously there as a great neutral exotic. The Bombardiers also got confirmed to get some synergy. Again, we don't know what the keyword it's getting. Just so remember that you do have that particular synergy when it comes to hunters. And finally, you've got Star Your Scales, which is, of course, the Powerhouse exotic. So the Hunter Strand super does look pretty juiced for crowd control. So this will just help out even more in higher tier content. Plus, you're getting your super back faster. And with next season's focus on Orbs of Power, just the new armor charge system, I think Star Your Scales is, while not explicitly getting a direct buff or any other changes, it is going to have a lot more synergy compared to its current state, where it's already pretty powerful. So that's it for the hunters. Looking really forward to it. We'll talk about our kind of opinions later on, but I'm going to pass you back to Saint, who's going to talk about the Berserker.
That's right. For the Titans, we have Berserker. The quote for kind of the outlook on this one is, "The hulking mass of a guardian stands before a squad of enemies, ignoring their taunts. Without warning, gigantic blades made of tightly woven strand matter surround their hands as they leap into the fray. Powerful blades whirling in fury. The Titans' powerful woven gauntlets slice through scores of foes, and the enemies tremble." For the melee attack, we have Frenzied Blade. This gets 3 charges. It is a dash attack where you dash forward and slash at enemies with their arm blades, that similar to how you would use in the super. And they sever victims, which again will result in kind of debuffing the target. They're dealing less damage. You can also change these together, so you can 1, 2, 3 if you have them all up at a time, just like you would like a sword attack, right? Chaining swipes together on a sword. For our Titan aspects, we have Into the Fray and Dringer's Lash. Into the Fray states that destroying a tangle weaves woven mail onto the Titan and nearby allies. Okay, kind of like our Void aspect that obviously that has been hugely popular. A little bit different. This also increases Titan's melee energy regen when you're wearing woven mail. All right, some good up close quarters combat flow there. Next up, the Dringer's Lash. On class ability cast, Titan Barricade blasts forward a powerful ripple that will suspend enemies when they're caught in the shockwave's path. Kind of like Kepri's Horn, the aspect, except it's pushing them up in the air, right? And instead of putting out some solar damage out there. For the actual super, the Blade Fury, you wield dual blades and roam around the battlefield with ill intent. So same thing that you would see come up when you would use your melee attack, dashing forward and slashing. You have the light attack, supercharged version of that. It's just going to deal more damage. And whenever you connect with an attack, it will increase the next attack speed up to 3 hits in a row. So some nice chaining there if you're going through a crowd quickly or on a single target. Connecting on the light attack also builds energy for the super heavy attack for each hit. In the heavy attack, you are going to throw out a pair of projectiles that will seek out enemies. It suspends them and damages them on impact, depending on, kind of how big the enemy is and all of that. Our exotic is the Abiant Leap, the barricade that is working with our second fragment there. Barricade spawns additional lashes that suspend enemies, and it looks like it's also giving woven mail. When you see it shown off in the gear trailer, the Titan immediately has that look, right? They have that green strand kind of surrounding their whole armor and all of that. So what can we synergize with the things that are currently existing? Immediately off the bat, armamentarium is double grenades, which means double grapple. So while the Titan's, specialty is absolutely woven mail, similar to how, I think that makes sense, right? Titans, they definitely want them to be like the tanky character, right? They specialize in void over shield. And again, here you see that kind of theme in woven mail, but you could go double grapple if you want to throw on your armamentarium, you could double down on that. Heart of Inmost Light, you trigger that with your melee abilities. You're getting your grenade back faster. If you're using an actual grenade, that's dealing more damage. Melee damage is up. Just always, it's good for everything. That's a topic for another date, though. Lastly, I'll mention Peregrine Greaves. So Peregrine Greaves is interesting because it gives you a big increase in your melee damage when you use some kind of shoulder charge ability in the air. I want to say it's like 230% or something like that. It's a lot. It's a massive damage increase to your melee damage while you're in the air. And I think that could be very effective if we are using that in combination with kind of the grapple melee attack. Could be good. It's a little bit niche, not quite as always uptime as some of these other things, armamentarium, Heart, and Most Light, right? You have a lot of utility to those constantly, but Peregrine Greaves is fun, and using that grapple melee dash could also be pretty solid. Impetus, what can you tell us about the Brood Weaver?
All right, Brood Weaver is the Strand minion master. So our big word here is going to be threadlings. So all 3 classes can utilize threadlings on Strand, but warlocks have an additional interaction with the little guys. So unexploded threadlings will return to the warlock and become perched, which means they will orbit the warlock like an arc or void soul. The next time an enemy is attacked, it will pop off and attack that same enemy. So we can actually keep threadlings. It's not a use it or lose it situation necessarily, which is going to be very nice as we move around the battlefield. Grappling to different points here means we can take our little guys with us, the little buggers. We also have a melee with 3 charges. It is called Arcane Needle. It is a projectile melee that tracks targets, causing high damage, and will unravel them upon impact. And they have specifically said that you can chain these 3 arcane needles the attacks in a row, which looks pretty cool in the trailer that they showed off for Strand. So a projectile melee with 3 charges. I'm excited. Don't typically get too excited for Warlock melees, but the footage, especially the ability to chain them, seems pretty exciting. And depending on what we can do with unraveling in our fragments, that could be pretty potent. Our first aspect is going to be Weaver's Call. On Rift Cast, you will weave 3 threadling eggs. These eggs hatch into threadlings when they hit a surface. Any perched threadlings are converted to additional eggs. Our second aspect is Mind-Spun Invocation. This is another grenade aspect for the Warlock, so this will improve our 3 grenade options here. For the grapple grenade, we will weave 3 threadling eggs from the target that was hit by your melee while you are grappling. The threadling grenade, we can consume this to generate a full complement of perched threadlings. So I imagine that would be quite nice as we're moving. You're not going to be able to grapple because this will be taking up your grenade spot, but if you're moving into a next space after you've killed all your inmates, you're able to immediately get those threadlings ready for the next engagement. I think that'll be quite nice. And then our final option here, the Shackle Grenade. The change here is that you consume this as well to gain a buff, which creates a suspending detonation on every kill. Not quite sure which kill that will refer to, if that's other ability kills or weapon kills or both, will remain to see, but that seems to be the suspending option there. Our super is really exciting. This is called Needle Storm. It is a deadly combination of burst damage and area denial. The Warlock will conjure strand matter into a fusillade of hardened spikes, launching them forwards with a wave of their hand. The missiles will stick into enemies and the environment before detonating and reweaving themselves into an army of threadlings, which the images that they show, the footage they showed in the trailer is quite hilarious. It is truly an army of little threadlings just slowly crawling towards enemies. So I'm very excited to fire this off for the first time. It does kind of remind me that the combination of burst damage and area denial reminds me of like some sort of combination of lightning surge and chaos reach, and that we're able to do a lot of damage all at once, and then there's also the opportunity for more damage as the threadlings go and hunt down any enemies outside of that initial burst blast area. So very excited to play with that. That seems like that will be very potent in GMs and raids and dungeons when you need to clear out a group of champions or an ad wave, any majors that might be bearing down on you. So very excited to play with that.
Hunters have Blade Barrage. Warlocks now have Bug Barrage.
That's right. That's right. That's awesome. Yeah. Very excited to play with threadlings. And Bungie knows this because they've given us our first Strand exotic, which is called Swarmers. This exotic leg armor will allow Warlocks to create threadlings to infest and attack enemies after destroying a tangle. Now, one thing I just want to say here, we might find this out before Lightfall or not, but it's unclear if by strand damage or strand abilities will unravel enemies or both. If the strand abilities only unravel, then for right now, my recommendation to you guys would be to spec in a high recovery with the Weaver's Call aspect, and then high discipline for more threadlings with the Mind-Spun Invocation aspect. So again, we want to take advantage of creating as many threadlings as possible, but that would require us to make tangles first. So we'll need to unravel enemies to get those tangles to generate. So that's just something to be thinking of when you go and seek down the Swarmer exotic, because we're not quite sure if this will be an exotic that we'll get at the end of the Lightfall Legendary campaign, or if that will be something that maybe is available only in a Legend Lost Sector. So if you're thinking about chasing down a Swarmer and you're trying to figure out what stats you want to prioritize on that armor piece with your Ghost mod, Recovery Discipline seems to be the better options here, the 2 stats that you would prioritize, just so you can really tap into generating the little bugs as quickly as possible. If strand damage does include weapon damage, and we're able to unravel enemies that way, then I would definitely keep an eye out for Quicksilver Storm, because that's our exotic option. That seems to be really great for generating tangles, but then any legendary strand options that might help create tangles, it's possible we get a weapon perk that helps us make tangles or unravel enemies specifically. It's something built around those verbs, so keep an eye out for that. But again, we'll have to wait and see what that means of, enemies damaged by strand will unravel, if that's specifically ability damage or also includes weapon damage, or even both. Both would be ideal, but we'll just have to wait and see. All right, that is it for our 3 classes, the breakdown that we've gotten so far here. I'm going to pass you back to Court to talk about some Strand compatibility, just stuff to have in mind as we are looking towards the next season.
Yeah, so this is another highlight from the 9th of February TWAB. They mentioned fashion and then just some perks and exotics that are going to sort of obviously going to persist through into Lightfall, but will have some synergy, or will have the green vibe around it. I'll kick us off with fashion here. They specified the 2020, 21 and 22 Solstice armor sets will have that. Subclass agnostic legendary finishers, the Ghost Fist Pump exotic emote, the Antaeus wards and its ornaments, the No Backup Plan and its ornaments, and the Ghost projections. So they'll all have the sort of Strand green kind of thread kind of aesthetic once we get into Lightfall. For the perks and exotics side, we knew about Elemental Capacitor and Osmosis from a previous episode, but they also specified Explosive Payload, Dragonfly, Cluster Bombs, Chain Reaction for weapon perks. I think Impetus and I were just talking about this before we recorded, not entirely sure why they specified explosive payload or, cluster bombs and chain reaction, but I think it's just a benefit of the doubt. Like, yeah, these will have that type of element that you could synergize with, we know it's not Font of Might next season, but will react and synergize with that type of perks and mod synergies. For the exotic side, for Warlocks, we have Chromatic Fire, which is the precision final blows with kinetic weapons, creates a Strand explosion if you're on a Strand subclass. And again, for Warlocks, we have the Mantle of Battle Harmony, where you're matching the Strand subclass and the Strand weapons, provides a bonus to super regeneration. And once you are at full super, you gain that 20% empowering buff for Strand weapons for a short time. For my fellow hunters, as I already mentioned, the Bombardiers, the Hunter Dodge spawns a Strand Bomb, which detonates and applies some sort of Strand verb. We aren't sure which verb it is at this stage. Back to the Warlocks, Verity's Brow, which is matching Strand subclass plus your Strand weapons, provides a grenade damage bonus, which is 20% per stack up to 5 times. So that's 100%. Double damage, and you get some grenade energy returns, and it synergizes with other teammates who will also get some grenade energy returns. And finally, they specify Fellow Winter's Helm, which is more of a void helmet, but it can be used on other subclasses. It's just got more potency on void. Your Strand-powered melees will weaken enemies, that is a 30%, and more powerful targets will grant an increased radius and duration of that weaken effect. There will be other exotic synergy likely coming in future updates. They did specify. They also mentioned new fragments, which were dumped in the... Was this in the top? Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is at the very end of their Strand article. They threw some out here, and it's like only 4, right?
Yeah. So we have 4. We'll start with the top here. It's Thread of Ascent, activating your grenade ability, reload your equipped weapon, and grants increased weapon handling and airborne effectiveness for a short time. Thread of Fury, damaging targets with a tangle, grants melee energy. Be good for hunters there, especially with the sort of the grappling and the tangle kind of synergy that we can get there. Plays back into your melees. Thread of Finality, which is finishers generate threadlings. Ooh, that's pretty. Okay. I will be putting that on. And Thread of Warding, which is picking up an orb of power, grants woven mail. So yeah, you do have that for hunters. We do have that additional kind of avenue to get woven mail, but that does require a fragment as opposed to at least at the moment with only 2 aspects per subclass. Hunters can we only have access to those two aspects, and you've got Surtarachne's facade for that woven mail. All right. Well, we'll give our thoughts and opinions about our kind of views of Strand in a moment, but we are going to talk about we got 2 articles. Again, we've been absolutely covered with new and articles and changes last week. So I am a little bit fatigued. From
just inundated with verbs, all right?
So yeah, this was from Press Start, and we also had one from PC Gamer, and both Kevin Yanis, who is the design lead, and Eric Smith, who is the feature lead, were kind of answering some questions from some journalists. So I'll kick us off here. We're going to kind of go around the round table here with the 3 of us. So they mentioned Strand versus the other elements, just a kind of perspective-wise. They mentioned Grapple provides players with more movement freedom than ever before, and Strand doesn't play like any of the other subclasses. It does have that unique identity. And the core gameplay loop for Strand is very dynamic. Mentioned here as well, using a Strand subclass, any Strand debuff enemy that you defeat is going to turn into a tangle when you kill them. So I think of, say, a Solar Scorch into Ignition, or a Stasis Slow into Freeze. It's that kind of primer into an effect. They did say lots of aspects and exotic armor will interact with tangles in various ways. Tangles will also last a fair amount of time. They didn't specify how much, but once you grapple onto it, it resets the timer, essentially allowing an indefinite amount of time if set up right. Tangles essentially replace Warmind cells, as Saint mentioned at the start of this episode. They were never supposed to last forever. So many of their functionalities have been folded into the Strand Sandbox, synergy, and interactions. And I think I would have enjoyed flying around with a Warmind cell, but that's still it's coming. It's coming for Lightfall. Some final points here. Strand is the high actions per minute APM class. First subclass to grant 3 melee charges, as we've been talking about. Strand Titan and the Warlock get 3. The Warlock Broodweaver Super was literally going to turn you into a giant spider. But that was cut due to a huge amount of modelling rework, which would have had to have been developed. And there is a fear of spiders. I am not necessarily a big fan of spiders.
Grow up is what I say. All right?
No, hold on.
I'm a spider dude. I'm a giant spider.
I would love to have a tarantula as a pet, but Jasper would probably not. He would probably eat it. So yeah, that's interesting. That's some nice.
What could have been, guys? What could have been?
They were like, "You want Spider-Man? Well, we give you Spider-Man." All right, I'll tell you what.
Literally
right now.
Spider-Man.
Wait.
So that was actually a really nice peek behind the curtains there. I'm actually
somewhere there's some concept art for that, and I will pay just stupid amounts of money to see that concept art.
Even if there's some like
original Broodweaver
animations as well, maybe just see early work of a warlock spawning into a giant spider. Interesting. Oh god, that would have been horrendous to see in PvP. Just this.
You just know the sound effect would have been disgusting too.
Yeah.
Just nastiness.
Right after we just nailed it with stasis and all its wild sound effects, you gotta get these creepy frickin' crawlies up in here.
Man.
As we've already previously discussed, they did emphasize that warlocks interacting with threadlings will be very different to other subclasses, and they have been wanting to take subclasses in a different direction for a long time. And this has been kind of, it's not explicitly confirming a 6th subclass, a 6th element, but there is plenty of ability design space available for a 6th subclass after Strand. And I think I read that more as there's more expansion to our current elements than a 6th subclass. But, if we do get one for the final shape, that'd be like thumbs up. That's your 3 light, 3 dark. But yeah. So interesting insight with Strand versus the other elements. Impetus, what can you say about the sort of fantasy?
Yeah, this was a deep kind of insight into, I guess, a high-level look at these abilities, specifically how the darkness abilities shape up to the light abilities. So they did mention that stasis was designed to be a crowd control element, and it was originally conceptualized as time crystals was kind of a theme for that. Strand, big point here is that the abilities team did not want to make another flavor of insta-kill and exploring more crowd control options, but the core driving fantasy was telekinesis, suspension, lifting things with your mind, stuff along that lines. Darkness subclasses in general are more about having a physicality to them. The light subclasses have an ethereal, magical, and energy-based vibe, design aesthetic to them, whereas the darkness subclasses, however, many of those we will get, are very much more physical. And I definitely, we only have stasis right now, but I can speak as a player that it definitely is the physical element for right now compared to the 3 light subclasses that we have, even after Light 3.0. Stasis does definitely stand apart as a very different concept, both in play and just looking at it on paper. So very excited to see how Strand continues that theme of physicality, and then also the telekinesis, as that can be a very tricky thing to pull off and communicate to a player through gameplay. So the footage looks incredible. Again, the high actions per minute is definitely something that is new here, and they're really pushing that, I think, with the grapple. That's kind of been the huge selling point of the new ability. So the Lightfall campaign is curated by the grapple and grapple tangles that are scattered throughout Neomuna. If you are having any doubt as to what element you'll be running around the new city with, grapple tangles are like normal tangles, but you can't pick them up and throw them for an explosion. You can grapple to them for free. So those are the ones that are scattered around Neomuna. You've seen these in various trailers, gameplay trailers for Lightfall. The grapple tangles do not have a 5-second lockout that would otherwise prevent hunters from using both charges back to back. You can grapple to moving objects and vehicles across the universe, and they've also emphasized this particularly, it's not just a mobility tool, it is offensive. You can use it that way, as we have described earlier with the grapple melees and the various synergies that you can get from it, like the Hunter's Ensnaring Slam and the Warlock's improved grapple with the threadlings, the little threadling eggs that spawn. So very excited to play with that ability. It is going to be an adjustment when we first launch into Lightfall. I think we haven't really gotten to play around in the air in PvE as much as we will. Obviously, Solar Warlocks have a lot of aerial gameplay, but this is going to have a level of mobility and movement, Strand will at least, that none of us are really familiar with. So I expect we'll be probably throwing ourselves into the void or bouncing off various walls and ceilings a lot more than we have been typically. So I can't wait to see all the clips of people dying in hilarious ways. The death montages will be quite enjoyable. Saint, probably something that's on a lot of people who have played Beyond Light on their minds. What is the grind going to look like for unlocking Strand?
Yeah, the first thing they said is that there's a lot of learnings from the stasis unlock grind. There's some good things there's some bad things there, and it was, by all intents and purposes, it was a grind to go through all these weekly quests and things and get your aspects and fragments unlocked. It's a bit more streamlined this time. Instead of being locked behind these time-gated quests, it'll be much more open, and that you can go and earn currency to unlock these things when you want to unlock them. And they also said by the end of the campaign, you will have a pretty competent subclass. You'll be able to play with the new Strand things on your multiple characters a lot quicker by going through and completing the campaign. We'll kind of have those foundations of a subclass versus Stasis and Beyond Light, where you really did not have a lot when you finished the campaign. I can't remember exactly, but I definitely wouldn't have said it is a fleshed out subclass right when you finish the campaign, right? You had to keep going, unlocking aspects and fragments week over week, unlocking each grenade individually, waiting week after week, right, to get all these things completed, and going through these extensive playlist type quests to get these things unlocked as well. So, the class that you come out of the campaign with should be much more fleshed out, and there's not going to be as much time gating to when you can buy additional pieces to use in your subclass. It's more of just how how much are you willing to grind to get these materials in whatever sources they are dropping from. When we think about kind of the future, we definitely have, Strand Aspects and Fragments, coming with the seasons later after Lightfall. There will be more Aspects and Fragments. And this is very similar, right? I think Stasis, we were talking about launch with 2 aspects each, is exactly what we were seeing here. And we're anticipating another 1 to 2 aspects, as well as another, maybe 3 fragments or something like that to keep coming out over the seasons as we release. They also touched on kind of our other elemental subclasses for a little bit here, and then there's more on this in a second, but this is kind of just like their outlook or some things that they mentioned in these articles. Definitely said that roaming supers are due for some buffs, especially harder content. They just seem to struggle in some places. Strand and Stasis supers really lean into their respective keywords for their elements, and they want to keep bringing that philosophy towards the other subclasses with roaming supers. The damage output and orb generation are kind of areas that they can target on in tune for, buffs, nerfs, all that kind of a thing. And they want to, they're basically trying to brace the community for a place where there are different mechanical outputs for supers. So going to start playing with that more as time goes on. So you're going to see less variation of it just kills everything, and a lot more variations of it has a specific role and will build into our team comp, which, I mean, that is by all means leaning into the RPG nature, right? You're kind of your banner shield to block damage, your well to buff it, and another, a golden gun to deal the damage, right? And all these, the way that those things could kind of like come together. And they also said, Well Radiance kind of falls into this realm of it's just too useful. Kevin Yanis clarified that they don't have any exact plans to nerf Well of Radiance, but they definitely think that it's open for changes. I think one of the things that we've kind of talked about and joked about is that Well of Radiance, it doesn't actually apply Radiance. I don't believe. No. And that, yeah, the whole idea where they're talking about like, oh, your subclass or like your super should fit in with the verbs of your subclass, just like does not, that like directly breaks that. Just like we had like blinding grenades and arc blind, right? And they're like, oh, no, we need to call this disorienting and we need to call this arc blind, right? Now we have Radiance and we have Well of Radiance, but they're not the same thing. So they said they don't have plans to nerf it, but I'm definitely, I am expecting that they will change it in some way.
Buff Well of Radiance is what we're trying to say here.
Exactly. More DR, more overshields, highest damage buff in the game, I think would honestly
50%.
In a pretty good spot. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about our verbs, we talked about our classes, aspects, fragments, some interviews. How you feeling? What do you think? Court, Impetus, you go ahead.
Go for it, Court. How you feeling about it?
Yeah, so for Hunters, I'm looking forward to it, and to lock on of what Kevin and Eric were talking about with Strand and Stasis supers and the sort of neutral game, really lean into their respective elemental keywords. I absolutely love that synergy, and it's something that a lot of our light subclasses, yes, they've went through the 3.0 process, and yeah, we know they're getting some changes sometime down the line, but just that synergy of our supers playing into our sort of neutral game, and then you can put in some weapons in there and some exotics is just a big thumbs up from me, and I'm looking forward to it. Hunters, I think the general consensus, at least from my perspective and just me talking to a few folks, whether it's been on the Discord or IRL, I think Hunters are looking in a really good position, and I think Warlocks are as well. Impetus. Yeah,
we've got a very unique fantasy, probably one of the more unique fantasies coming with Strand and the Threadlings and being a summoner. I know some people who maybe are a bit more hardcore in their RPGs might cringe at Bungie trying to co-opt that term, but we are summoning little objects that will be helping us out, killing enemies for us. They look like they're going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to start throwing out bugs and having them orbit my head as I'm zooming around from place to place here. So this does seem to be a much more mobile form of crowd control than what we have on Stasis. Shadebinder is very much dominated by our turrets. I think that's probably the big thing that everyone knows us by, that and our super. And while we have Osmiomancy gloves that allow us to kind of hold this extra charge with the Cold Snap Grenade, and we can take that around, the turret itself is very much a stay-in-place object, and it has a limited range here. We don't know what kind of range the Threadlings will have. We also, one thing I'd like to know in particular is what kind of surfaces can the Threadlings traverse. So the footage that we've seen so far has mostly been on flat spaces and then slopes. I'm cautiously wondering how they're going to handle things like staircases. I don't even know if they can go up walls or ceilings, That would be something that I'd want to be aware of just when we start thinking about how to utilize these. But for right now, I'm absolutely loving getting to take my own little fire team around with me as I go through both the Lightfall campaign, but then everywhere else in the universe of Destiny. It seems like it's going to be really fun to just start spawning a bunch of little creatures, little green bugs that'll go and track down enemies. And excited to see if this will be something that we can call it a debuff. Or is this more of another kind of support function? I think that's perfectly fine, either one. I won't be against either option. But can't wait to see how this can tie into exotic armor, exotic weapons, and then the new mods and fragments that we're going to be having, and see what we can do with that. Saint, how are you feeling about Titan?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know how many of our listeners out there have played through the Borderlands series, but I think there'd be an endless amount of memes if these things can't go upstairs. All right? That would just be absolutely tragic.
Me and my army of claptraps.
Well, they'll just return to the Warlock, and you can go upstairs. And
they'll
then
be like,
they'll
yeah,
get
sorry,
back off.
no can do, boss.
Come here, guys. Come on back.
I can't jump these platforms. But you can.
You're gonna have a big armful of little Threadlings like the Elixir kids,
Guys,
just
wait up!
running
I gotta pick up all my Threadlings.
Yeah, Titans. People have really responded pretty negatively to Titans. They're like, "Oh yeah, it's just green punching class this time instead of blue punching class or light blue punching class," which I hear that, I get that, and I think that there are quite a few Titan melee supers. I think obviously you look at Striker or Burning Maul. I think that those very much so fit that, but Hammer of Soul doesn't really fit that vibe, and I don't think that Behemoth honestly does either. I get that it is a roaming super that you can deal melee damage with, but I think that the biggest value from Behemoth comes from the fact that you can move quickly and you can generate a lot of crystals more than I'm actually punching things, right? I don't know. So I get it, but you're talking about the tanky class, the punchy class. It is kind of our core identity. So I don't really have that much concern over the fact that it's punching. I think that my thoughts are where is this going to land in the sandbox? Woven Mail is cool. I like that, and I like the way that you can interact with it and give it to your teammates. And this also really lines up with our Void Overshield. But Void Overshield is very strong. It's a very strong ability, especially after its damage reduction bug was corrected, and now it's 50% DR on the overshield itself when the overshield is up, which is ridiculously strong in in-game content. So I think that just depending on how body armor works, that could be a strong competitor against Void Overshield, and also kind of how does the uptime work out on all these things. But you also have you're kind of in a defensive super, and you're kind of in an offensive super, right? You're suspending things where you're also doing a lot of melee damage, definitely kind of in that Behemoth style of I want to freeze things and I want to deal melee damage. So it's got to compete with Behemoth, and it's got to compete with something like Hammer of Soul, right, where I can be throwing my projectiles from a pretty good distance and triggering my solar verbs there. So I think it has some good offerings. I like the suspend and the freeze are kind of a good counter to each other as far as just it's like stasis in a darkness theme, but it's different, right? And it's exploring like another path. So I think there's some good value to it. It ultimately comes down to, how does it compete with stasis? How does it compete with solar? And can it provide more benefit than a void overshield? Can it provide more crowd control and damage than a behemoth or something like that? So I'm really interested. And I don't know. I'm really the grapple strike out of the air is probably my favorite Strand ability. It is just a really badass maneuver to be able to throw a tangle and then to grapple onto it and then just shoulder charge into something out of the air. Very, very action hero-y, as they reference from their kind of inspiration for this. So, I think that's all I got.
I think I would have got the backlash if they'd also not double confirm that, one, roaming supers are due for some buffs. They've been due for some buffs for a long time, especially in harder content. But also them alluding to, Striker Titan. It's got no synergy with the Arc subclass, so it's its own thing. And, what could they do to improve Striker Titan, to make it more of a crowd control or crowd clear? Yeah, they could up the damage, but that's not going to be enough. Playing into the whole jolt, it applies jolt or it applies blind, would be a nice little kind of synergy to that specific class. And you look at a lot of the roaming supers across all three classes. Spectral blades for my hunter folks. It's its own thing. It's just Blade Dancer from D1, but it's void. That's pretty much it. Yeah, you can go invis, but there's no synergy. It doesn't apply any keywords, and there's 6 keywords for void. So
isn't the arc staff from the hunter super where you throw the staff the only one that actually jolts?
Yeah.
Right?
So when you cast that, it's got a big AoE. It can do single target damage, and it can do area effect as well. But it also has that jolt, and it's a really great jolt as well in terms of in the hierarchy of jolting. And you don't see that with any other subclass outside of Strand and Stasis that plays into their keywords. I'm thinking off the top of my head. Golden Gun requires a little bit of fragment and aspect synergy, but not really. Blade Barrage is its own thing. Tethers are their own things, but they also interact with suppression, volatile, and weaken or debuff. But for the rest, like Chaos Reach, Storm Trance, like none of those have synergies. They are just arc.
Yeah,
Dawn Blades.
I think one of the only ones I really started getting into recently is you can on Solar there is a fragment for super final blows cause targets to ignite.
Yeah,
and you can actually build into that, but you're having to spend like a couple of fragments on your super, which is just not have a good uptime, right? Like Hammer of Soul is one of the lowest cooldowns, and that's getting changed. Which
yes, it is
a good segue into our path ahead. Impetus, you want to kick us off on this?
Our next article, because we're still not done with the information that came out this past week. All right, yes, the road traveled and the path ahead. This is we're going to be talking a little bit more about light subclasses, and then also a bit about ability regeneration or ability energy generation mods here. So a quick note from, this is from Kevin Yanis. So now that all the 3.0 subclasses are out in the wild, we have some tuning work to do on the various subclasses on the various systems connected to the subclasses. One such system is our core character stats. The amount of ability regeneration that the discipline, strength, and class ability specific stats provide hasn't been meaningfully touched since the launch of Shadowkeep. Since then, across Aspects Fragments, exotic armor mods, and weapon perks, there are a variety of ways to have powerful abilities with very high uptime. This has resulted in some PvE activities losing the tension that made them special and introduced additional noise into the Crucible. And he concludes this by saying that the goal of the abilities team is to return to a sandbox similar to the 30th anniversary pack Sandbox, which I know from a PvP point of view is probably considered one of the better sandboxes that we've had in a very long time. So I'm I'm definitely fine with that on a PvE front. I don't know about you guys, how much you enjoyed that, because that was right before we really got together. But were you guys fans of how that felt in PvE, the ability sandbox for the 30th anniversary?
I mean, it was either this or a Hoyle nerf. So hey, I'm
Okay.
I'm good. But yeah, I would agree that was a great time in the Crucible. I did play a good amount of Crucible in that season, and I think it is a good place. Like we probably all knew that we were too strong, right? And a lot of these changes are coming to target that, and I think this is good change.
Yeah, Courtney, you in agreement there?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like it was a great time, but that was also pre 3.0s. So the comparison, yeah, like it was a great time, but we've moved ahead and we've got a lot more synergies and stuff. So yeah, we are very powerful now. But going back to the same kind of vibe as the 30th anniversary pack would be absolutely fine from me, because we have got far too powerful, and there's just a lot of outliers that need to be kind of ironed out.
Well, the outliers here are going to be our core stats. So these are getting a change here. They have rescaled the efficacy of Discipline, Strength, and each class ability stat on Grenade Melee, and the class ability rates. So in general, the regen provided by a tier 10 stat in Lightfall is now roughly equivalent to a tier 8 in the current system. So for an example here, the Vortex Grenade on Void, currently at tier 10 is a cooldown of 47 seconds. We are projecting this to be around 1 minute and 1 second at tier 10 Discipline come Lightfall. This may be different if the base cooldown changes. We're not quite sure how that's going to work, and the reason we're not sure is that each stat tier now provides a more consistent gain in cooldown reduction rather than the heavy spikes at lower tiers. So that's why we're speculating that it will be around 1 minute and 1 second. We're not quite sure. But again, in general, the regen provided at tier 10 is going to be equivalent to tier 8 in our current system. So definitely a nerf to the passive cooldown gains, The ability energy generation mods. We are now going to be more freely able to socket multiple copies of each. We will have 3 type-specific mod slots up from 2 and are no longer restricted to the elemental affinity. These include Bomber, Outreach, Impact Induction, the utility melee and grenade kickstarts, Invigoration, Insulation, Innervation, Hands-On, Ashes to Assets, and Dynamo. The armor mod energy costs have been reduced across the board. We will obviously waiting to see just how much they've been reduced for each of these. And then the artifact mods no longer need to be slotted into armor. They are passive perks. The plan is to continue tuning the ability energy economy along with updates to specific ability potency to make them feel more powerful. They did also want to highlight a few cooldowns for specific things, single out a few of what exactly they're going to look like come Lightfall. So the base, some grenade melee and class abilities are getting their cooldowns adjusted. There will be more details in the patch notes when Lightfall goes live. Hunter Dodge, though, was actually getting mentioned out here. So the 2 dodges are being reverted from a previous hotfix levels. So Marksman's Dodge, the base cooldown has been reduced from 34 seconds to 29 seconds. The Gambler's Dodge base cooldown has been reduced from 46 seconds to 38 seconds. Good change there. Get a few more dodges. I know the hunters are going to be very happy about that. We did get a lot of notes in regards to supers, so I will pass you back to Court for that.
Yes, so super regeneration times are still going to be based on tiers. Generally speaking, roaming supers have longer cooldowns versus one-off supers. Bungie acknowledges that roaming supers have taken a backseat in PvE content, especially in higher-end activities, as we've been discussing, and currently working to address this problem. And they'll be sort of looking this over the coming seasons. But starting in Lightfall, the Orbs of Power and base cooldown changes will be effective. For roaming supers, they've increased the maximum number of Orbs of Power that can be created via defeating targets from 5 to 7, and for one-off supers, it's from 7 to 5. These Orbs of Power generation changes won't be affecting Well of Radiance, Ward of Dawn, and Shadow Shot variants. That's your Deadfall and your Mobius Quiver. They did confirm that Hammer's Soul, Daybreak, and Spectral Blades will now be Tier 2, and that is from Tier 1 base cooldown, and that is 10 minutes and 25 seconds. Just as a sort of reminder of what where the supers are in relation to each other coming in Lightfall. Presumably there's no other changes. So there's nothing in Tier 1 now, with Hammer, Soul, Daybreak and Spectral being moved up. In Tier 2, which is a base cooldown of 9 minutes and 16, for Hunters, it's Arcstrider. You've got Golden Guns, both of them, and you've got Spectral Blades. For Titans, it's Hiss of Havoc, Hammer Soul, Sentinel Shield, and Glacial Quake. For Warlocks, it's Stormtrance, Daybreak, Nova Warp, and Winter's Wrath. For Tier 3, that's base cooldown of 8 minutes and 20. Hunters have Gathering Storm and Mobius Quiver. Titans have Thunder Crash and Burning Maul. And Warlocks have both Nova Bombs. Tier 4, which is 7 minutes and 35 seconds base cooldown. Hunters have Blade Barrage, Deadfall Tether, Silence and Squall. There's nothing there for Titans, but Warlocks do have Chaos Reach. And Tier 5, which is the fastest cooldown of 6 minutes and 57 seconds. Nothing for Hunters, but Titans have Ward of Dawn and Well of Radiance for the Warlocks. We aren't sure where the Strand supers will sit, but they'll be in one of those tiers. I think a lot of them are more well, probably looking at Tier 2, Tier 3 for all of them. That's the impression I get anyway. Although Blade Barrage is there in Tier 4, quite a fast cooldown there.
Put your bug buddies in Tier 4, maybe.
Yeah,
that's right. Bug Barrage, Tier 4.
I think this is a sort of perfect segue to kind of give a brief crash course in super generation, because I know there's a little kind of confusion of how super works. And again, presumably none of this gets changed for next season, with the exception of, intellect stat tiers kind of getting moved about because of the base cooldown. But we've got 3 direct effects that kind of affect your super generation. First is the passive regeneration, which is commanded by your intellect tier. The base cooldown is measured from Tier 3 intellect, and you get an approximate plus 30% passive regeneration if at Tier 10. Again, intellect wasn't directly mentioned, but the intellect stat tiers are likely going to get their effects tweaked. But that's just current Sandbox. So that's your main passive regeneration. Next up, you've got your active regeneration. Now this is more kind of during fights. Think of Frenzy. It forms effects if you're dealing and receiving damage, that kind of thing, if you're within the firefight. So active regeneration is all about dealing and receiving damage. Primaries are the best for gaining super, and faster and harder hitting weapons also provide more super gains. The more you're in active combat, the faster you gain your super in general. Enemy kills / assists also give you that active regen. Higher tier enemies like bosses provide the most amount of super versus lower tier like elites and miners. And you've also got your super tier placement bonus, which isn't well kind of documented out there, not well known. So if your super exists in the tier 1 slot, which will be none by Lightfall, you get a minus 20% kind of malice rather than a bonus. And if it's tier 2, you get minus 10%. Again, that's your base cooldown of 9 minutes and 60 seconds. At tier 3, there's no bonus. So that's kind of your kind of baseline. Tier 4, that's 10%. And tier 5, it's plus 20%. Those are the placement bonuses. Finally, you've got your direct modifier. So this is stuff that you can throw on and as a piece of armor or mods such. So you've got super gains. That's a sort of subcategory of this. That's your armor mods like melee hands-on and grenade ashes to assets. We know those are returning. You've got Thresh, which is a weapon perk. You've got Whisper Bonds, which is a stasis fragment. You've got Star Your Scales, which is where you get larger gains from Orbs of Power. And you've got Doomfam Pauldrons, which gets, it's once per use, but you get your powered void melee kills, gives you some super gains. You've got your additional super regen, which is another subcategory here. Crown of Tempests, which stacks up to 3, does give you a sort of increased passive super regen on arc and jolt kills. And you've also got Nezarec Sin, which is void kills. Some examples for super returns, which is the third subcategory here. So on Celestial Nighthawk kill, you get that third of your super back. Ursa Furiosa has the Sentinel Shield when you're blocking with that. The more damage you take, the more super gen you'll get back, up to 50%. Same with Phoenix Protocol, which is kills and assists in a Well of Radiance. Again, goes up to 50%, or I should say it caps off at 50%, and then you've got Orpheus Rigs. Again, the same deal here, caps off at 50%, the more Deadfall Tether connects you have. So that's a nice little kind of crash course on super generation. I think the foundation and the backbone for this system will remain as is, and especially with it being more focused on Orbs of Power for next season and the armor charge system. I think this will be something that a lot of folks will be looking towards and focusing on for their future build crafting. I know I will for various builds, especially when it comes to Starrier Scales for my Hunter fellows. All right, I'm going to pass you over to Saint, who's going to start us off with some tuning with the abilities.
Yeah, we actually have a lot here. Buffs, nerfs, we've got new aspects and fragments they give a ton of detail on. So I'll just jump in here. They have said right off the bat, this is not a comprehensive list. They are tuning a lot of things in Lightfall. The full list will be in the patch notes with Lightfall, and presumably some more in the season or two following Lightfall. First up is Word of Dawn. Maximum health reduced from 13,500 to 8,000. All right. Damage dealt to Word of Dawn by PvE combatants has been reduced to compensate. In general, Word of Dawn's effectiveness in PvE should not meaningfully change. So basically, it's a little bit easier to kill in the Crucible, which after all these Iron Banner weeks, I think some people saw this one coming. Standardize the damage dealt by each type of kinetic and energy weapon against the ward itself. Previously, energy weapons did about 2.5 times damage to ward, and kinetic weapons did just 1 times damage. Now, regardless of damage type, all weapons will deal 1.5 times damage to Word of Dawn. Armor of Light has also been basically updated to reduce its potency in PvP. Your health reduced, maximum health reduced from 425 to 300, but it does inherit the Void Overshield 50% PvE damage resist, and it no longer negates precision damage. So this is going to be when you're inside the actual bubble. So pretty much Bubble Titans in the Crucible got a little bit weaker there, is kind of the summary. It shouldn't be too much of an effect in PvE. Thunder Crash. Oh, this one hurts. Reduce maximum flight time from 5 seconds to 4.5 seconds. Reduce size of the damage volume around the player while in fight by 20% and pushed it further towards the front of the player to make flyby disintegrations more intentional. Descent now begins earlier in fight. Reduce landing detonation size versus players by 20%. And that last part is unchanged in PvE. Ouch.
That's rough, buddy.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Fists of Havoc increased PvE damage by 20%. All right, I guess. I don't think that quite makes up for the loss in flight time and direction control for Thunder Crash, but yeah, it's something to balance the scales. Next up, we have Daybreak. Super energy cost reduced from 10% to 6.5% per swing. Increased PvE damage by 25%. Pretty solid buff there. Phoenix Dive. Phoenix Dive's base cooldown has been reduced from 82 seconds to 55 seconds at Tier 3 recovery. Approximately 28.5 seconds at Tier 10. This could vary due to all the changes and rescaling that's coming. While Heat Rises is active, Phoenix Dive's restoration duration increased from 1 to 3 seconds. While Daybreak is active, Phoenix Dive's cooldown is significantly reduced, allowing for rapid activations. While Daybreak is active, Phoenix Dive's detonation maximum damage increased from 80 to 220. Phoenix Dive's coming back. All right.
No, it's not. Don't say that. Don't say that at all.
Spark of Resistance.
7.5 seconds.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's something, you know?
It's something.
A Spark of Resistance. This is a 25% DR in PvE and 10% in PvP arc fragment. Increase nearby enemy count requirement activation from 2 to 3. Reduce lingering time after you're no longer surrounded from 4 to 2 seconds. All right, that was a really strong one, honestly. Nerfing the Architects. Starting in Lightfall, physics collision damage will no longer be lethal to Guardians. Fall damage will still be lethal when Lightfall launches, but we plan to also make that non-lethal in a mid-season update. You still take damage from physics collisions, but it will leave you at 1 HP instead of outright splattering you. You know, may all the trolls lament. All of the eager edge enjoyers are probably in shambles right now because they can't throw their fire team members into walls and kill them. Suppose you can still throw them off the map. You know, that the kill boxes will still work, but yeah, it's a tough one. That's not it though. We have a lot of new like fragments and stuff coming up. Impetus, what can you tell us about our light sandbox tools and stuff like that?
Yeah, we're getting a pretty hefty update here. Wasn't expecting this. So some fragment additions are intended to be spiritual successors to combat style mods, which again, a lot of this probably was revolving around elemental wells and certain charged with light mods, but some are also brand new to allow access to subclass verbs that some classes didn't have before. So it means more potential build crafting synergy to look out for. I will start things off with Arc. There wasn't a lot of changes made to this. We do have 2 new fragments here. The first one is Spark of Instinct. When critically wounded, taking damage from nearby enemies emits a burst of damaging arc energy that jolts targets. Those of you who read this might be thinking of a certain charged with light mod, an old charged with light mod called Reactive Pulse. That seems to be the replacement here, so it's now Spark of Instinct. Jolt is going to be good for Overload champions next season, and again, Spark of Ions can synergize with this. When we kill jolted targets, they will drop an ionic trace. Hunters, you can take advantage of this in a few ways. The flow state aspect, killing jolted targets, grants the amplified status, and then lethal current, melee hits on jolted targets, applies the blind condition. Warlocks, we have Electrostatic Surge, killing jolted targets creates an ionic trace, and then of course we can also synergize with the exotic armor piece Crown of Tempests, where jolt kills adds a stack of conduction tines. So seems like that's going to be a pretty neat little transformation of Reactive Pulse into a new arc fragment. We have another one though, Spark of Haste. You have greatly increased resilience, recovery, and mobility while sprinting. We can pair this with Amplified and the Speed Booster. We could also pair this with Spark of Focus. While sprinting, you gain increased class ability regeneration. That would probably be a nice way to kind of focus, depending on what class you're running on, to get either resilience or recovery or mobility, getting that class ability charging back even faster. You can also, Titans, pair this with the Juggernaut aspect. Full class ability grants an overshield. If you're amplified, you grant damage resistance and increased shield effective HP. So very excited to play with these on the Arc subclasses. That's going to be very nice to have. Solar, this is getting a pretty hefty change here. So we are getting the new elemental object pickup, which is the Fire Sprite. Those are going to be created by a suite of new and existing solar fragments, and more specifically, Fire Sprites will grant you grenade energy on pickup. Just grenade energy. That's going to be a big thing to keep in mind here. Our new fragment, Ember of Mercy. When you revive an ally, you and other nearby allies gain restoration. You can pair this with the Ember of Benevolence fragment, where applying restoration to allies provides increased class ability regeneration for 6 seconds. It will also have an additional effect, which is picking up a Fire Sprite grants restoration. So we can synergize even more with that aspect of the new fragment by combining it with the Ember of Solace, where restoration grants, the restoration status now lasts 50% longer. Or you could also pair it with the Ember of Empyrean. While restoration is active, solar ability and weapon kills extend restoration's duration by 4 seconds, from 4 seconds up to 12 seconds. So a lot of fun ways to play with this now on the new Ember of Mercy fragment. We have another new one here, the Ember of Resolve. Solar Grenade Final Blows grant Cure. Oh boy, another reason to run Starfire Protocol. Here we go. We do have a few changed fragments here for solar. First one's going to be Ember of Tempering. Now creates a fire sprite on solar weapon kills while active, in addition to the original effect, which was it grants you and nearby allies within 12.5 meters plus 10 recovery for 8 seconds, and that does stack up to 3 times, which is plus 30 recovery, and also grants plus 20 airborne effectiveness. The Ember of Combustion has been changed as well, now creates a fire sprite on solar super defeats, in addition to the original effect, which was solar super defeats cause an ignition. Well of Radiance makes all weapon damage count for this effect. Just bear in mind, that's for the well spawning user only. The Dead Shot or the 6-shot Golden Gun returns 1 ammo per kill. You can pair this with a lot of different effects here. I'll quickly go through these. You could pair that with the Ember of Wonder, so killing 2+ enemies with an ignition spawns an orb of power. You could pair this with the Titan Roaring Flames aspect, where the ignition kills grant stacks of Roaring Flames up to 3 times. Roaring Flames increases the grenade, melee, and super damage, as a reminder of that. You could also pair this with Ember of Blistering, which grants grenade ability energy depending on the enemy classification. I won't go through all the different tiers here, but at the low end for miners, it's going to be 8%, and then mini bosses, champions of bosses, grant you 25% grenade ability energy, with guardians coming in at a 20.75%. So that is a lot of different ways to synergize here. Solar 3.0 is looking really solid. We do have the Ember of Searing as our final one here. Now creates a fire sprite when defeating scorched targets, in addition to the original effect, which was granting melee ability energy based on the enemy classification, and that scaled similar to the Ember of Blistering, where minor defeats granted 8%, and then mini bosses, champions of bosses granted 25%, and guardians had 20%. So Solar 3.0 looking really solid now. Fire sprites, again, big thing to keep in mind, they grant grenade energy only on pickup. They are not a true elemental well anymore. That has been split up, and we'll see that a little bit more with Void. I'll pass you guys over to Saint for that.
Yeah, we got some talk here about 2 new fragments and 3 updated fragments. They start off with a Void Breach. Your Void Breach is your kind of elemental pickup object, just like a Stasis Shard or Archaonic Trace. They can be created by a suite of new and some existing Void fragments, and it will grant class ability energy on pickup. First up is our Echo of Cessation. This is one of the new ones. Finisher Final Blows create a burst of void damage that cause nearby enemies to become volatile. Defeating volatile targets creates a Void Breach. Ah, man. Wow, that's kind of strong. We'll just hit on a couple things to pair with. We'll talk more about all these at the end. You can pair with Repulsor Brace for a Void Overshield. Collective Obligation, you can siphon off that volatility. Echo of Obscurity, finishers provide invis, and I mean that's already great for Titans and Warlocks as a way to access invisibility. Now it's just like even better. You pair with Gerfalcons, right? You go finisher while invis, you'll get your 35% empowering buff. Stylish Executioner, you can go invis after defeating a volatile target, which also allows you to get volatile rounds after you're already, it's just like loops into that so well, it's ridiculous. And then you also could throw on Echo of Persistence for just longer invisibility on top of that. As far as like modifiers that we're looking at, that apply volatility in season 20, right? We have Mobius, Tether, Gerfalcons for volatile rounds, Controlled Demo, Chaos Accelerant, Magnetic Grenades, Pocket Singularity, and then Echo of Instability, Void Grenades, give volatile rounds, which can also go to Collective Obligation, obviously. So really strong one off the bat there. Next up, we have Echo of Vigilance. Defeating a target when your shields are depleted grants a temporary Void Overshield with the 50% Void damage reduction. You can pair this with Persistence for the longer Overshield, or you can also pair this with Offensive Bulwark, increase melee lunge damage and grenade regeneration when you have an Overshield. Controlled Demo, I feel like, is often picked over Offensive Bulwark because of its health, but Offensive Bulwark does have a very strong argument to be made, especially in a scenario like this where you can guarantee that you have an incredibly high uptime on that Overshield. We've also got our updated fragments here. We have Echo of Domineering now creates a Void Reach when defeating suppressed targets in addition to its original effects, which are granting plus 30 mobility, 4% forward movement speed for 10 seconds after it, basically will refresh after you ready a weapon and suppress targets. So very pretty strong there, honestly. You compare that with a Stylus Executioner, you go invis when defeating a suppressed target. You pair that with the Repulsor Brace to get your Void Overshield up on any weapons that have that. The Collective Obligation, again, can siphon off this suppression. Some other modifiers for suppression in Season 20, you have Deadfall and Mobius and Bombardiers. Maybe if that is synergizing there with its suppression. Titan's Shield Bash will suppress, and then suppression grenades collective if you have it siphoned off. Ruinous Effigy, the heavy attack now will suppress Tractor Cannon, Two-Tailed Fox's Void Rocket, the Wave Splitter, and then Flash Counter on Swords will also do that. So honestly, pretty good buff there. Really going to be a nice way to ensure high uptime on some of your abilities if you're leaning into that heavily. After that, we have Echo of Harvest. This is another one that's been changed and updated. It now creates a Void Reach when defeating weakened targets with precision damage, in addition to the original effect of precision kills on weakened targets generate an orb of power. This is going to go really nice with the Stylus Executioner, which will cause you to go invisible when you kill one of those weakened targets. And again, void debuff targets for Repulsor Brace, and a lot of the similar things we've just seen: Deadfall, Mobius, Stylish Executioner, Trapper's Ambush, Snare, Child of the Old Gods, Spellwinners, and then the Echo of Undermining, which will weaken Heart Shadow, Tractor Cannon, Flash Counter. A lot of the verbs that are going to work here for the void debuffs are pretty ubiquitous across the tools that you can use to capitalize on them. And then finally, Echo of Starvation is our last one that's been changed here and updated. Now grants Devour on picking up a Void Breach, in addition to its original effect, which was picking up an Orb of Power gives Devour with 5 seconds. You can pair this with Echo of Persistence for a bit of a longer duration, and then killing enemies with Devour will not only heal you, but also give grenade energy, and that kind of depends how much, basically, on what kind of enemy you're killing. Your lowest level miner, Tier 1 miner, is about 7.5%. Your Tier 2 miners and Tier 1 elites is 11.5%. Tier 3 miners and Tier 2 elites is about 13.25%. Tier 4 miners, and then kind of Tier 3 and 4 elites will be 20%, Guardians 20%, and then any kind of mini-boss, champion bosses is all 20% as well. So Echo Starvation just got a little stronger because it just got a little bit easier to proc, right? We'll talk more about that one in just a second, but we do have a few other things to cover before we kind of wrap up our changes here. Court, what do you got?
Yeah, so they didn't mention anything about ionic traces or stasis shards, or even the Strand. We know Strand is also getting its own elemental pickup thing, but we don't know any information about that. But explicitly, they didn't talk about ionic traces and stasis shards, but wanted to put this in this episode just to give a perspective. Again, these may change in Lightfall. The potential synergies might float around, may have some cooldowns added or anything like that. But in terms of the current sandbox, ionic traces still provide energy to all abilities. That's 12.5% to grenade and melee, and 15% to class ability. Now, Warlock friends can use the Fallen Sunstar exotic, which doubles these gains. So that's at 25% and 30% respectively. And nearby allies get 10% to each, grenade, melee, and class, on top of ionic traces moving and tracking faster to the Fallen Sunstar user. So again, that may change, considering ionic traces are quite easy to spawn in the Arc sandbox. I presume that'll maybe get shifted down a little bit, like 7.5% and 10%. Who knows? We don't know anything, but just take that in mind for next season. You can, of course, synergize your ionic traces, and you can spawn them elsewhere. Cold Heart is one which I think I'm looking towards using. If these ionic trace energy gains go unchanged, Cold Heart may be the trace rifle to go to really gain on those ability gains. That spawns ionic traces every 2 seconds of sustained fire, so that's continuous fire. It also reduces the counter it takes to get max power from 40 to 33 shots when you pick up a ionic trace. A Delicate Tomb applies Jolt on next shot when collecting a ionic trace, and the Catalyst also refreshes for ammo on ionic trace pickup. And as a reminder, killing enemies with Delicate Tomb progresses a counter, whereupon reaching 100% spawns an ionic trace. Depending on the enemy classification, it's a lot kind of easier here. It's minors, it varies around 17 to 20%. So we're talking maybe 4 to 5 kills, and then everything else. So elites, mini bosses, champions, bosses, and guardians are 100%. So that's a guaranteed spawn. And for Warlocks, again, you do have that Electrostatic Mind aspect, which grants Amplified when collecting an ionic trace. So that's the arc Sandbox. Moving over to Stasis, which there's no mention of Stasis in this particular article, which was curious. I'll talk about my thoughts after we list the melee energy here. So again, current Sandbox, Stasis Shards are your elemental pickup for the Stasis subclass, and they're all about melee energy. So with Void being class, Solar being grenade, Stasis appears to be melee. For small shards, if you spawn the small shards, you'll get 12% melee energy return. And if it's a large shard, which I think only hunters can do in the current Sandbox, with Grim Harvest, it spawns those large shards, which is 50% melee energy. You can pair those with Whisper of Conduction, which pulls the shards from up to 50 meters away towards you, and Whisper of Hunger, which increases melee energy gains to 20% and 80%, 80, respectively, for small and large. Other Stasis Shard synergies, we do have Whisper of Rhyme. I've recommended that quite a few times with my Stasis Hunter subclasses in previous episodes when we've been talking about gems and other content. Collecting a Stasis Shard heals you, and if you are full health, you gain a Stasis Overshield. Collecting additional Stasis Shards heals the Stasis Overshield and refreshes the duration. As a reminder, this is not 50%, it is just 25% DR to combatants only. And cannot be used with other non-stasis overshields, or if you're in an active super. So you can't pair, say, Repulsor Brace and Whisper of Rhyme to get that stasis overshield. I think, if memory serves me, when I was testing a lot of these combinations, I think Void Overshield takes precedence, which is probably for the best because it's 50% DR. And there's some weird synergy with it. You can refresh Void Overshield, but it doesn't necessarily refresh the health, it's just the duration. Speaking of Grim Harvest, which was the aspect I was talking about just a moment ago, so slowing or freezing combatant spawns a Stasis Shard. The size depends on the enemy classification. There's no cooldown for this. So minors, any type of minor, whether it's tier 1 to tier 4, it's one small shard, and everything else, whether that's elite, mini-boss, champion, or boss, is one large. For Titan friends, we've got Tectonic Harvest, which is breaking stasis crystals, spawns one small shard per crystal, and again, there's no cooldown, and this is what I mean, that they don't have access to large stasis shards. And for our Warlock friends, we've got Glacial Harvest, which is freezing an enemy spawn shards. The number depends on the enemy classification. For all minors, tier 1 to 4, it's one small shard. For elites and guardians, it's 2. For mini-bosses, champions, bosses, and vehicles, it's 3 small shards. And they do have this kind of 10-second cooldown, where after the user collects 6, they that cooldown where they're unable to gain more melee energy on collection. So yeah, that's a little kind of mini crash course of Ionic Traces and Stasis Shards. And again, we don't know anything about the Strand. Hopefully we'll get maybe some information before Lightfall, but of course get all of that come the Lightfall patch. And we're all excited on this podcast about future build crafting and builds and all that. So again, just to really highlight, put this in perspective, temper your expectations. That's all the information I've listed there is just for current Sandbox, may change for Lightfall. All right, before we wrap things up for this episode, how are we feeling in regards to the ability Sandbox changes? Saint and Impetus.
Impetus, you take it away, man.
I mean, just looking at the information presented, it feels like Gerfalcon's Hallmark Void Hunters and Starfire Protocol Solar Warlocks are going to be just exceptional.
Even stronger.
Even more reasons to run those two. I'm sure there's more stuff coming out that will probably paint a fuller picture, but yeah, very happy overall with all the fragments. It's kind of crazy once you list out all the different synergies, just how interconnected everything is. I think you were very wise to point out that, yeah, the synergy sandbox is just so radically different since the 30th anniversary. So even if the abilities team does want to go back to that previous state, it will not look and feel the same, even if the ability uptime is kind of back where they want it to be. So yeah, that's a very astute observation to make there, Court. But yeah, I'm very excited for all of this. I mean, how about you, Saint? Anything catch your eye in particular? Just general thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Echo of Vigilance is like, I am struggling to find the name of this mod. It would kick in and give you massive DR whenever you were weak. I can't remember the name of this for the life of me. It was a Charge with Light mod that was incredibly popular during like the Vault of Glass return.
Oh, Protective Light?
And Protective Light, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this is, right? Defeating a target when your shields are depleted grants a temporary void over shield. So it requires a kill. Okay. It's a little bit, there is a requirement there. I think that's just a very strong, just like save you real quick, right? And this is the kind of thing where even if I'm a Titan and I'm playing with a lot of overshield, or if I'm not a Titan and I don't have a lot of uptime for overshield, this can just kick in and give you that extra little bit of survivability at the exact moment in which you need it for just taking out a low level ad or something like that. Echo of Cessation and Echo of Obscurity, is just like, now you can have any class come in and run Aeon's gauntlets, right? And you just have an incredibly strong build set up, right? You let's say I'm on my Titan and I want to run Aeons to support my team. Now am I not only giving like overshields from my barricade, but I can go in with my overshield up and my extra DR. I'm an absolute tank. I can go in for the finisher. I'm making things volatile. I'm going invisible, right? I can back up. I can use repulsor brace, on my submachine gun or whatever it is, and I'm back to an overshield. My teammates are picking up the charge. If I'm using controlled demo, right, my teammates are going to be getting 100 health points every time I explode a volatile target within like 15 meters of them. There's just like a very, very strong finisher focused Aeons build coming out of there. And yeah, I don't know. The arc ones are cool. Nothing against that. Those are both nice. And yeah, the solar ones, let's just make the Warlocks build even better, which I'm trying to like hold judgment until we get the like, maybe there'll be something in the state of the game that we don't know, or maybe there's something in the upcoming patch notes that will kind of change this. But it's just kind of nuts. Yeah, Starfire Protocol's one weakness was healing, and now that's gone. You don't even have that anymore. So I'm super interested to see if like Starfire or Hoyle or any of the other like really strong exotic options we have out there are going to be brought down, or if other things are going to be brought up. That's probably my like biggest last
I'm interested
hope.
Too, Saint. I'm really interested.
Yeah.
Really, really interested.
But I'm honestly surprised that they revealed so much detail on this stuff, right? They put out they mentioned a solar fragment. It's kind of like a hint that there was some stuff changing, but yeah, I was not expecting them to come out and detail such, or give so much detail on all these upcoming fragments and things like that, which I think is cool. And it also shows that they want to keep things like balance with each other now that we've all kind of like reached the 3.0 world this season, and obviously still next season and seeing after that. They want to keep all the elements like relatively in line with each other is like the goal. We'll see if we end up there.
We will see. Court, you got anything to add?
Yeah, go ahead, Court.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Echo of Cessation, and it's just like, oh boy, this Falcon build is just being enhanced. So we've got enhanced perks, and now we've got enhanced Falcon's Hallmark. Because, oh boy.
Yeah.
In our little script, I wrote up some of these synergies, and that when I started writing this up for Falcons, I was like, this is a giant loop of synergy. Just Falcons into stylish, into enhance it with Echo of Persistence, and then you've got Echo of Cessation, Echo of Obscurity to really, I mean, for Titans and Warlocks that can get that, but I suppose not necessarily required for Hunters. But that Echo is not going to leave any of my Void subclasses Void builds on my Hunter. Some really great changes elsewhere. I would have liked to have got more stuff about ionic traces and stasis shards, just to see, are they getting any changes? I think, it's nice to get information about fire sprites and void breaches. It's those two that are currently in the sandbox weren't really discussed whatsoever. And then really my final point here, which I alluded to earlier, was there was a lack of stasis anything. Which is, I'm not saying stasis is at least in PvE, it's not in a bad spot, because we've talked about before where their supers and their subclasses, they synergize a lot better than Arc, Solar, and Void. So it's not necessarily like they need a lot of changes, but it was kind of curious why nothing was discussed about stasis. They've got the full kit of 4 aspects, and they've got after this after Lightfall, if they're not getting any new fragments, they'll have the least amount of fragments with Strand, but which Strand will get more throughout the year anyway. But it was just curious. That was just one, like, this is fantastic, like 2 thumbs up from me. Just stasis not being mentioned was a bit like puzzling from my perspective. But again, this wasn't a full list. They did say that. They did specify that. We've been getting an absolute waterfall of information the last couple of weeks. I'm not surprised if they're going to save a few things for Lightfall for us to discover ourselves. But I don't want to end this episode with a kind of downer, but I am absolutely thrilled with all these changes, and then upcoming changes that they've been confirming for seasons past season 20. We know they're looking at Roman supers and potentially getting some synergy subclass verbs for those type of supers as well.
Yeah. A lot is changing. A lot is changing about this game come Lightfall, and we've still got more information that'll be coming out this coming week. So, all right. Well, I think that will wrap up episode 50 of Podcasts versus Enemies. Thank you so much for listening. Whether you've been with us from episode 1 or episode 49, hey, we appreciate you. We also want to thank our audio engineer, Autodidaktos, for his help and expertise over the course of the show. Hopefully he's still with us after this 5,300-word article drops tomorrow and doesn't quit out of disgust, but we do appreciate his continued support and help. We will see you guys next week for what will probably be another information-heavy episode, but until then, my name is Impetus. You can find me by that name on Discord and in Destiny, and as Impetus always on Twitter. Court, where can we find you?
Yep, you can find me over on Twitter as Court Projects, over on the Discord as Court, and you can find my documentation and various infographics that I've been creating over the last couple of weeks over on Discord as well, and over on the Massive Breakdowns website, where you can also find other applications and spreadsheets to enhance your Destiny experience. Saint, where can we find you?
Yep, my name is Saint Kabr. You can find me by Saint_Kabr on Twitter, YouTube, and hanging out in the Massive Breakdowns Discord, where there will certainly be a lot of Discord following this state of the game. Until next week.